The following episode contains material that may be uncomfortable, upsetting, and unsuitable for some audiences. Listener discretion is advised. February 4th, 2010, Fallbrook, California. One quiet suburban evening, a family of 4 simply vanished. No signs of a struggle. In fact, their home looked completely untouched. No note. Just one phone call and 2 small dogs left behind. 3 years later, 2 shallow graves are found in the Mojave Desert when a surprising suspect emerges. A family friend, Chase Merritt. Welcome to another episode of Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces, the podcast where the world of true crime meets the paranormal. I'm your host, Cassiopeia. Every Tuesday, I deep dive into chilling cases that have baffled investigators and the eerie places where dark stories still linger. Today, we'll step into the shadows of one of the most haunting family disappearances in recent memory. What followed was a trail of cryptic clues, false leads, and a case that grew colder by the day until a shocking discovery turned everything upside down. This is the creepy case of the McStay family. Joseph and Summer McStay lived what many would call the American dream. A modest home in Fallbrook, California, tucked into a quiet cul-de-sac, 2 young sons, a thriving small business, and plans for the future. Joseph McStay was 40 years old. He was warm, driven, kind, and he ran a company called Earth-Inspired Products, creating beautiful custom water fountains and fixtures. He worked from home and, according to friends, rarely missed a deadline, even when life got hectic. Now, Joseph had big goals. He wanted to expand the business into Mexico, where he'd been pursuing a possible deal. Now, Summer McStay was 43, originally named Virginia Lisa Aranda. She later changed her name to Summer. Now, she was deeply devoted to her family. Some who knew her say she was protective of her children, protective of her home, and protective of her peace. Others described her as passionate, spiritual, a bit intense, and maybe even a little guarded, but all agreed she loved being a mother to her boys. Now, Gianni McStay, just 4 years old, loved soccer and cartoons. Joseph Jr., 3, had an infectious giggle. The boys were close in age, full of energy, always running in circles in the living room or playing with their 2 dogs, Bear and Digger. Now, photos from those years show exactly what you'd expect. Beach trips, pizza nights, Halloween costumes, 2 little boys snuggled into their parents on the couch. Now, in the months before they disappeared, the McStays had recently moved into a new home in Fallbrook. It was a little bit of a fixer-upper, but they were excited. Summer was working on decor while Joseph was renovating a home office, and the family seemed settled, even happy. Yet, beneath the surface, there were tensions. Summer had clashed with some of Joseph's family. Now, she was reportedly hesitant about people coming over unannounced. And I can't blame her because sometimes, life can get hectic and I'm not always ready for company. But like any couple juggling 2 kids in a business, they had their arguments. But nothing to suggest what was to come. Now, the last known image of the McStay family together comes from a neighbor's security camera. It's a grainy clip, time-stamped February 4th, 2010. You can't see anybody's faces, just a shadowy figure, perhaps 2, getting into their Isuzu Trooper around 7:47 p.m. Now, inside the home, bowls of popcorn sat on the couch. Fresh eggs had been cracked into a bowl on the kitchen counter. The family's beloved dogs had been left without food or water. The McStays were gone. Not kidnapped in a struggle. not the victim of a violent home invasion. They just disappeared. Where had they gone? Why would a family with so much to live for leave behind two vehicles, their dogs, over $100,000 in the bank, and absolutely no trace? Now, February 15th, 2010, 11 days after the McStay family seemingly vanished, Joseph's brother Michael McStay broke into the Fallbrook home through a window. He found something strange. The dogs, Bear and Digger, were hungry but alive. Fresh food was on the counter. There was a bowl of popcorn on the couch. Diapers, prescription medication, the family's cell phones. Everything was just left behind. There were no signs of forced entry, no blood, no overturned furniture, just silence. But the 1996 Isuzu Trooper was also missing. Now, it wouldn't be long before that SUV turned up 70 miles south in San Isidro near the Mexican border. Now, security footage in that area show a family of four, two adults and two small children, crossing into Tijuana on foot. Now, once again, it's also a little grainy. It's also, you can't really see very well, as you can see. But at first glance, the resemblance was uncanny. Were the McStays fleeing voluntarily? And if this was the case, why? News reports stated authorities now believe the McStays have traveled into Mexico. Their vehicle was found abandoned in a nearby parking lot. Investigators are pursuing leads across the border. Okay. The theory took off. Summer had once mentioned about wanting to move to Mexico, and Joseph had been doing business with a company based in Baja, so maybe they just decided to leave. But doubts quickly sprouted. Summer's passport was expired. The children's birth certificates required for re-entry were at home. The couple's bank account holding over $100,000 remained untouched. There was no activity on their cell phones, no withdrawals, no phone calls, no digital trail. Just absolutely nothing. The case was downgraded from suspicious to a missing persons report. Now, the San Diego Sheriff's Department wasn't treating it as foul play, but the family knew something was wrong. One family member said, quote, "Summer would never leave her dogs. She loved those kids. She would just never disappear and not call," end quote. Now, tips poured in, sightings in Mexico, calls from psychics, rumors of a murder-suicide, but none of it led anywhere. Months passed, then years. Investigators continued to recheck the home. They found a computer search from Joseph's laptop. What documents do children need for traveling to Mexico? But most of it was inconclusive, basic, Google search, no follow-up searches, and not necessarily unusual for someone planning international business, or, even if they were possibly planning a vacation, or honestly just going down there to scope out the area, because if they were maybe going to have a house down there, or, kind of travel back and forth, it's just not out of the question. Now, frustration on all sides grew. With no crime scene, no bodies, the case just went cold. But, as always, someone knew the truth, and eventually the truth would rise out of the desert sand. Now, what would you think if your loved ones just disappeared? Just gone into thin air, but their house looked completely untouched, as if they were just running to the store to come right back. November 11th, 2013. Nearly 4 years since the McStays disappeared without a trace, and the case had gone quite cold by this time. No arrests, no bodies, still no answers. A motorcyclist was riding off road through the Mojave Desert near Victorville, California, a remote, windswept patch of land just outside the city limits. Nothing for miles but sand, scrub brush, and silence. He spotted what looked like a weathered outline in the dirt, something unnatural, something disturbed. Authorities were called, and they began to dig. The earth was shallow and just 12 inches below the surface. They found bones. A human skull tied with a cord. They kept digging, and then a second grave, a much smaller one. In total, 4 bodies, 2 adults and 2 children, buried side by side, left in the middle of the desert like trash. The remains were sent for forensic testing. Dental records confirmed the unthinkable. Joseph McStay, Summer McStay, Gianni, and Joseph Jr., all 4 had died from blunt force trauma. The medical examiner's report was chilling. At least one of the children suffered a fractured skull so severe it suggested multiple violent blows. Now, this was the child. A 3-pound sledgehammer was found at the same graves as the bodies, stained, rusted, and buried with them, like a signature. They weren't just murdered, they were massacred. There was no attempt to conceal the site with care. There wasn't a deep burial. No real effort to hide them from the world. Just 2 holes in the sand, dug hastily, shallowly, in a place where no one was supposed to find them. But someone did. And for the first time in nearly 4 years, this wasn't a missing persons case anymore. The McStay family had been found. The public's worst fears were confirmed. The McStays were dead. And what started as a disappearance was now a murder investigation. Now, this led everyone to question who did it. Who had the rage or the motive to slaughter a family of 4, including 2 young children? And why leave them in a desert graveyard? Now, when Joseph McStay needed custom ironwork for his upscale fountains, he turned to someone he trusted, Charles Chase Merritt. Now, Merritt was more than a subcontractor, he was a friend. The 2 men worked closely together. Joseph handled client relations and orders while Chase crafted the metal pieces. Now, according to many who knew them, they spoke on the phone several times a day. And by the time of the McStay's family disappearance, Merritt had been a part of Joseph's business and a part of the family for over 3 years. He'd been inside their home, he knew the layout, he knew the kids. But Merritt wasn't just a hardworking welder. He had a record that told a different story. In 2001, Chase Merritt was convicted of felony burglary and receiving stolen property. He'd also faced charges for theft, using false checks, and grand larceny. His criminal record, at least 8 felony convictions, would have barred him from many jobs, but Joseph gave him a chance, a second chance. On February 4th, 2010, just hours before the McStay family vanished, Joseph made one phone call. The last phone call his phone ever made. It was to Chase Merritt. Now, when investigators first questioned Merritt, he said he hadn't seen Joseph that day, but phone records told a different story. The 2 men had spoken for over 20 minutes that afternoon. And that wasn't it. Cell tower data placed Merritt's phone in the high desert near Victorville on February 6th, just 2 days after the McStays disappeared. The same area where, nearly 4 years later, their bodies would be found in shallow graves. Even more troubling, just after the McStays vanished, Merritt began forging checks from Joseph's business account. He wrote over $21,000 in fraudulent checks to himself, then backdated them and tried to cash them at multiple banks. Surveillance footage shows him pacing nervously and wearing sunglasses inside. When questioned, Merritt told police he was devastated, that he loved Joseph like a brother, that he couldn't eat, he couldn't sleep. He stated, quote, "I was probably the last person to see him alive, and that haunts me," end quote. But inconsistencies began to creep in. He told investigators Joseph had looked tired and even depressed. But then he changed his story and said that Joseph had an upbeat, joking around, high energy. He claimed Summer was controlling, even difficult, and that she might have had something to do with it. Classic deflection. Still, in 2010, the case wasn't a murder investigation, so Merritt wasn't a suspect yet. He wasn't arrested, he wasn't charged. In fact, he gave interviews to CNN and other outlets expressing concern and support for the family to be returned or to return. He told interviews, quote, "I can't imagine anyone hurting them. They were beautiful kids, and Joe was my best friend," end quote. But the evidence kept piling up. His fingerprints were found in the McStay's abandoned SUV. The vehicle authorities believed was used to transport the bodies to the desert. Now, he claimed it was because he had once worked on the dashboard. Okay, I could see that being a valid reason. I mean, I get into other people's cars, my fingerprints, my DNA, if I shed hair is left behind. But Merritt also failed a polygraph test and then refused to take another one. Now, of course, like I've stated before, polygraph tests aren't always, reliable because you could be telling the truth and it could show that you're lying, or you could be lying and it could say you're telling the truth. It just all depends on how great you can keep yourself composed. Now, perhaps the most damning, Merritt had intimate knowledge of the investigation. He was obsessed. He called detectives repeatedly to ask what they knew. He inserted himself into this case, a behavior that many investigators see as a red flag. And this actually happens a lot when it comes to crimes like this. The person who committed the crime, whatever it may be, tend to insert themselves in and be as helpful as possible because they believe it makes them look innocent, when in fact it's quite the opposite. By 2013, he was under serious surveillance. And after the discovery of the graves that November, detectives began closing in. On November 5th, 2014, nearly 5 years after the McStays vanished, Chase Merritt was arrested for 4 counts of first-degree murder. Of course, he pleaded not guilty, and he maintained his innocence. But the prosecution believed they had their man. On the morning of November 5th, 2014, 5 years after the McStay family vanished, Charles Chase Merritt was arrested outside a fast food restaurant in Chatsworth, California. He was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. Prosecutors claimed Merritt bludgeoned the entire family to death inside their home on February 4th, 2010. They alleged he acted out of greed, angry that Joseph might have been cutting ties with him professionally. Days after the murder, Merritt forged checks totaling over $21,000 from Joseph's business account. He tried to backdate them, tried to explain them, but the timing was too perfect and too suspicious. The McStays were last seen alive February 4th. Merritt began writing those checks by February 5th. The state's theory was chilling. Merritt murdered Joseph and Summer sometime in the evening, likely while the children were asleep, and then killed the boys later to eliminate witnesses. It wasn't until January 7th, 2019, more than 4 years after his arrest, that Chase Merritt finally stood trial in San Bernardino Superior Court. The trial was massive. Over 60 witnesses, hundreds of exhibits, graphic photos, financial records, cell phone pings, forensics, digital trails. The courtroom saw tears, rage, and exhaustion. And the poor McStay family sat through it all, reliving every gut-wrenching detail. Now, one thing that I found kind of interesting was how did they have over 60 witnesses and hundreds of exhibits when this was, just a little bit, or like before all of, everything kind of started coming out, there was nothing. But of course, like, I mean, maybe it was, bank tellers and things like that, and the checks. We don't know how many checks he was writing to himself. If it was over 21,000, there may have actually been quite a few, because maybe he was smart in that sense and he was writing smaller checks. But I still feel like that's a lot for a case that was cold for like 4 years. Now, prosecutors argued the evidence told a clear story. Merritt's DNA was found on the McStay's Isuzu Trooper, the car likely used to move the bodies. His cell phone pinged off a tower near Victorville gravesite days after the family vanished, and the forged checks proved motive: a financial collapse, theft, and betrayal. The defense called it a house of cards. They argued that no physical evidence tied Merritt to the actual murders. There was no blood, no murder weapon recovered from his actual possessions, no fingerprints inside the McStay home, and there was nothing indicating a struggle. Which, actually, if you ask me, if they trusted Chase Merritt, there wouldn't be a struggle. In my opinion, if he forced them out of the house somehow, I don't think, I mean, maybe they would have put up a struggle, but if he caught them off guard, or if he said, hey, let's, maybe they were meeting up with him, from that phone call. Defense attorney James McGee painted an alternate theory. Maybe the killings happened elsewhere. Maybe someone else used the trooper. Maybe someone else had motive. But the jury didn't buy it. On June 10th, 2019, after deliberating for about a week, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty on all 4 counts of first-degree murder. 7 months later, in January 2020, Charles Merritt was sentenced to death. He now resides on death row at San Quentin State Prison. But even as the trial ended, something lingered in the air: doubt. While the jury delivered a clear verdict, the public conversation was far murkier. The trial answered some questions, but left many others hanging. For starters, where were the murders actually committed? Once again, no blood was ever found in the McStay home. Not even in the carpets, not on the walls, not in the garage, not in the sink or shower pipes. If a family of 4 had been beaten to death with a sledgehammer, where was the mess? Some believe that the crime took place elsewhere, in a warehouse, a vehicle, or even at Merritt's property, and the bodies were later transported. But without a murder scene, this all remains a theory. Now, then, there's the cell phone data. Merritt's defense team challenged the reliability of tower pings, and experts testified that cell signals could bounce, that it was possible, albeit unlikely, that the phone appeared near the graves when it wasn't. And the trooper? Well, Merritt admitted he had been in it months earlier. He'd helped Joseph install a part in the dashboard. Could that explain the DNA? Now, critics of the case point to one simple concern. It was all circumstantial. There were no eyewitnesses, no confession, no direct physical evidence of Merritt committing the murders, just motive, digital trails, and a few inconsistencies. But to others, the circumstantial case was overwhelming. Some asked, who else had the motive? Who else had the opportunity, the means, and the knowledge of where to bury them? Public opinion remains split. The documentary Two Shallow Graves stirred the pot even more, highlighting the McStay's complex family dynamics, Merritt's fiery testimony, and possible alternative theories involving Joseph's brother, Michael, or Summer's past relationships. In the end, a jury made their decision. Merritt is now on death row, but for some, the case doesn't really feel finished. The McStay family is gone, their home is silent, their story is now frozen in time. Justice may have been served, but was the full truth ever found? After the verdict was read, some of the members of the McStay family wept. Others said they just felt numb. However, there were no cheers, no joy, just a heavy, hollow relief. They finally had an answer to what happened. They finally had someone to blame. But the story of the McStays still doesn't sit neatly in the past. Chase Merritt is still awaiting appeal. His attorneys continue to argue that he was convicted on circumstantial evidence and that the prosecution never truly proved where or how the family was murdered. In 2022, Merritt filed for an appeal with the California Supreme Court, claiming ineffective counsel and evidentiary bias. As of now, that appeal is still under review. In the meantime, the home where the McStays once lived was sold. Their Earth-inspired products website no longer exists. Their sons, Gianni and Joseph Jr., would be teenagers today. Now, many still believe that Merritt is guilty, that greed, jealousy, and desperation drove him to destroy an entire family. Others point to inconsistencies and missing forensic evidence as reason for doubt. And some, especially those close to Summer, believe deeper secrets died with her. Old tensions, family estrangements, but things that nobody want to reveal on record. In the 2022 documentary Two Shallow Graves, Chase Merritt himself declared, quote, "They know I didn't do it," end quote. He remained animated, emotional, and unwavering in his denial. Quote, "They didn't want justice. They wanted someone to blame." Quote. True crime communities continue to debate the evidence. Reddit threads and podcasts dissect the timeline, and every few months a new theory surfaces, usually around those same questions that I've asked a couple of times in this episode. Why was there no blood in the house? Why didn't Chase Merritt leave the country if he was guilty? Why did it take 4 years to find the bodies in a desert so close to civilization? In the end, what matters most isn't the lingering speculation. It's the lives lost. A mother, a father, and 2 young boys, left in shallow graves, taken from this world before they even had a chance to live it. Thank you for joining me on this week's episode, The Story of the McStay Family and the Friend Who Became a Suspect. A story of love, betrayal, and the haunting silence between justice and truth. And on that note, I will see you next crime. You've been listening to Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces, the podcast where the world of true crime meets the paranormal. I'm your host, Cassie Opea. Join me every Tuesday as I deep dive into chilling cases that have baffled investigators in the eerie places where dark stories still linger. If you can't get enough of these creepy tales, consider supporting the podcast on Patreon, where you can access exclusive content, early episode releases, and bonus material that'll make you sleep with one eye open. You can also grab some Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces merchandise to keep the spookiness close, whether it's a mug for your morning coffee or a hoodie to wrap yourself in on those cold, stormy nights. If you love what you hear, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode, tell your friends, and give a rating to help with that pesky algorithm. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, keep your lights on because you never know what might be lurking in the dark.